Well, hi everyone, welcome back to my studio. Now I've been asked to give my opinion and test in collaboration with a new company, well, new company to me, and I thought I'd just show you. I've just had the package delivered, so I'm going to show you what's inside basically. Well, let's open the package up and see what we've got. Well, it's nicely wrapped. That's one good thing. That's what I like to see. And yeah, there we go. Okay, so we've got basically some GRABIE watercolour pad, 100% cotton, 15 sheets, 300 grams. That's 140 pounds, and it's 21 centimeters by 14.8 centimeters. So that's the watercolor paper, and that is the watercolors that they've sent me. Apparently there's 50. I'm not sure that I need 50 to paint pictures, but they're vibrant colors, highly permanent, high saturation, and easy to blend. So artist quality for all skill levels, portable and easy to carry. So that to me all sounds pretty good. It's guarantee there. If your product does not perform properly, please contact us, service@grabie.cc for a replacement. It's an American company. So let's open the package up and see what we've got. Well, we'll start off with the watercolor pad. It's nicely covered in film, which is nice for protection. So we like that. That seems to work well for me. So we'll put that in the box. That's it. Yes, that's a nice little pad, ideal for sketching. Yeah, that folds quite well, quite open and easy to tear off, I would imagine. Yes, that's good. Looks good quality paper. It's meant to be cotton paper, so that's looking good. Then we have the watercolor set, which I'm not sure what we've got in the set, but we need just to take there again the plastic covering off, which, as I say, I like to see. Put that in the bin. That's it. Okay, let's have a look and see what we've got inside. Oh, nice little tin, nice little portable tin. Yes, we've got well, there you go. Lots of varying colours there, which is quite a lot of colours, but will, you know, for someone who's beginning, would find that extremely useful. A pad there for mopping away. We've got a small brush there that is good for initial washes, and of course we've got one of my old favourite wet pencils, which I would presume you fill up with water, and once damp you can then use it to moisten up the colours. So that's looking good. Do we have anything else, or is that it? Oh, a selection of brushes. There we go. See what they're like. Well, there's a lot there. Nice small brushes, more for detailed work, but I think we can probably use those. So there we have it. That's my collection of colours and paper and the necessary brushes, and also a colour chart. Okay, right, yep, so the colour chart works in that format with yellow ochre, yellow grey, burnt umber, raw umber, red ochre, brown, Van Dyke blue. Yep, we've got lots of variety of colours there, so it'll be quite interesting to see what we can do with those. Well, there's the package. As I say, we've got the colours, paper, a selection of brushes, quite small, but not too sure that that really makes a big difference, particularly on that size of paper. We do have one decent size brush, but I know the company make lots of other size brushes, so always a good thing to check up on. A nice tin palette, which I like to see a metal palette, and a wide variety of colours. So, and the best of it is, this one's got a colour chart. So what the first thing we're going to do is to put in the colours in their respective squares, moistening the colours off and putting them into their squares, just to see the colour we actually achieve. Well, hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm working in collaboration with a company called GRABIE, and they produce art materials for the beginner and the much improved artist. When you buy this particular watercolour set, you get colours, you get paintbrushes, you get a sketching pad, and a 12% offer from the GRABIE company. Well, with this set you get 6 fine brushes, you get 1 flat, you also get a brush that, what I'd call a wet brush, that can be used for all sorts of different purposes. And there's the vessel that holds the water. You just fill it up with water, screw it in, release it for a little bit of air, and then it becomes wet. You can spread paint and damp paper with that, and you get all these colours that are very useful. You know, this set really caters for the complete range of beginner. If you're looking to paint flowers, if you're looking to paint landscapes, if you're looking to paint buildings, if you're looking to paint just design paint, in other words, design sort of shapes and you know, all sorts of possibilities really. And you also get a swatch card, which will be the first thing I need to fill in, so that it matches exactly the colours that you've got there. And if you fill that swatch card in, it's ideal because you can see not only what it looks like when it's very dense, which is in the palette, but also what it looks like when it's diluted and put into the swatch card. So let's do that as our first exercise. Well, what I'm going to do first is to fill in the colour swatch. That is that there that you get with the complete set, and I'm going to use this flat brush. You don't get a water container, but all I've used is just a simple tin that I had in the studio, so that's easy enough. And I'm going to damp the brush thoroughly. When you damp your brushes, when they're new, if they're dry, always make certain they're thoroughly damped, because air can get in the brush and you don't pick up enough water. Remove some of the water on the edge of the container, Then I'm going to start off with the yellow ochre. And I'm just going to see, there we go. Now you can see the difference, a little bit more water with that. The difference between what's in the palette and what the colour actually looks like. And what we do, we just spread that across there, not too powerful. May put a little bit more colour with that, just to thicken it up a touch. There we go. And allow that to dry. We clean the brush thoroughly, remove some of the water. Then we go into the yellow grey. What colour is that, one wonders? Well, we can see it in the palette as quite dark, but oh, it's like a greeny grey or a yellow grey, and just draw that across. And a lot depends on the amount of water to paint ratio, will depend on the colour or the tone of the colour. So in other words, if you don't use too much water, then you get a very dark yellow or dark yellow grey. If you use a lot of water, you get a light yellow grey, but the actual colour will be exactly the same. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to continue. What have we got here? Burnt umber. Right, there we are. That's obviously a brown. Yep. And a little water with that, and we draw that across. Clean the brush again. Now I'm going to get some tissue to actually clean this palette off. Now I'm just going to use ordinary kitchen roll tissue, and all you do, you get water, you damp those thoroughly. If they're dry, they could be a little harder to damp, and then you just lift off the colour. Then you can start again. Now I wouldn't be too concerned if you get discoloration within the plastic mixing tray. It's not a problem. Doesn't really make a big difference to the colours you mix. And now I'm going to continue with this. I'm going to then go into the raw umber. Just check that colour, so we can see exactly what all these colours are and the tones of them. Well, not the tone, but the actual real colour. This one is red ochre, so you would assume that it is a little on the red side, which it is. Gradually get used to the amount of water you need per paint. And then we move to brown. And just see what sort of brown that is. Oh, right, that's a nice brown. And I'm going to continue like that, filling in the complete swatch. And there's the last colour gone into the swatch. Now we just got to clean the palette again. Take the tissue, mop it away. All palettes will discolour at some point as you work. And that's all you need to do to create a swatch. So you can actually see the colours that relate to the colours on your palette. So when you paint, you can lay this out and you can think, well, I need a brown or a red or a green. Or you could almost, because of the amount of colours here, you could almost, well, you could make a painting out without actually mixing. So this really is a palette for the absolute beginner. It's ideal for the absolute beginner. And I'm going to show you now how to mix and create a painting out of these colours. Now with this set comes a GRABIE watercolour pad, 100% cotton, 15 sheets, 300 grams, £140 in old weight, and the size is 8¼ inches by 5½, somewhere around about that. And it's we've got 15 sheets of good quality watercolour paper of a reasonable thickness, because that's the key to painting a good watercolour. You need quality paper. Now I've opened the pad cover up, and now I'm just going to tape down the corners just to stop them lifting. It's only a little bit of masking tape of some sort. This side it's actually attached, but this side isn't, which you normally get in a pad. And all we need now is to create our watercolour. Well, here are the materials that I'm going to use, and also I'm going to need to change my water. I like to start off with clean water. Obviously after making the colour swatch, it's turned a little bit on the grey side, but I rarely remix as or change water regularly through the painting process. So let me change my water, but in the meantime I'll just run through the brushes. I'm going to just use the wet brush that has water in the in a container at the base of the brush, and it's ideal for damping the paper and also laying broad washes on. So I've filled that reservoir up with water, so that's ready to go, and I've taken the obviously taken the top off. Placed in that palette is a sponge. Now that could be useful for lifting off colour. And then I'm going to use one of the GRABIE number 3 brushes that comes with the set, and I may even use that flat that I used for painting the swatch, but basically we'll work with those materials. Now, as I said, this video is to look at the GRABIE 50 set watercolour with paper and mixing palette, and it's, as I say, it's an introduction, I would say, to watercolour painting. But you can go a long way with it, you know. But you may need to add the odd brush in, as much as the odd mop brush perhaps. But let me show you how to paint a simple subject, 2 trees in a landscape. Now a lot of people when they're learning do have problems with trees, so I'd like to start with trees because I'm primarily a landscape painter. So if you're looking to paint landscapes, then I'll show you how to do that with this set. Obviously it's ideal for the person that wants to paint flowers. There's so many colours in there, but let me show you how to paint a simple scene, and I'm working from a sketch that I made out in the field the other day. It's only a very small sketching pad, 2 lovely trees in a landscape, made simple really. Right, well I'm going to start off with the number 3 brush. It is the larger because of the paper. I'm not doing small details at this moment. First thing I'm going to do is put in the sky. So I've thoroughly damped the paper, and I'm looking for a blue that suits the sky of the day, and I think it was somewhere around the sort of Prussian blue. Yeah, that's a nice deep blue. Pick up plenty of water, and we'll use the Prussian blue, and will create, notice how I keep adding water. I've got a nice damp colour, a nice lots of colour, and I'm just adding, it's lovely paper this, adding a simple sky. So just before that dries, I'm going to get my damp brush and blend in places, particularly on the outside edges. And that I've left is purely the just use that damp brush just to add a little bit. Even you dip into the paper, into the paint, water, sorry. So that's the sky. There we go. Look at that. And let's have just a little more blue over here, shall we? Pick up a little more blue. There we are. So I'm dampening the paper with the damp brush. There we go. So I've got a couple of, and the white areas you leave are, of course, the clouds. And just spread that through. Spread the colour on the paper. There we go. We've got clouds. We've got the start of a sky, really. And as I work down, I'm now going to go back to that other brush, clean it again. I'm going to use a grey, because I need a grey. Now I need a warm grey. I've got Payne's grey here. So let's just see what that does. There we are. I'm dropping that in to the undersides, Payne's grey there, of the clouds. And I'm just using this brush, just clean it up, to soften the tops. So I'm dampening the paper again, and I'm just painting in a very weak, just keep adding water, grey, because that's the undersides of the clouds. Here we are, and that's as simple as that. And then all you need to do, use the damp brush just to sweep that through down to what I would class as the horizon line. And along that horizon line, that is an effect along that area there. And along that horizon line, I'm going to use, just keep that brush damp. It's got water in there, so it will always keep damp. I'm going to clean the brush, and I'm going to use a little of the raw ochre. I'm just putting that in the palette just so that I get the tone of this right. There we are. A little raw ochre, quite weak. Notice how I'm adding plenty of water along the base, or where the clouds and the sky meet. And just blend that up a touch with the damp brush into the sky area. And where that finishes is basically your horizon line. In other words, the area along there. So that's a simple sky. Now when you paint your skies, obviously they will vary, you know. This is a guide, you know. I've been painting years, so I know how to control the colour. You probably will end up with some hard edges here and there because you're not quick enough, and that is normal when you're learning to paint. But all you need is a couple of decent dark blues, and if you can blend out with the wet brush, even if you have to keep damping up into the water, you know, don't be afraid to go into the water if you need more water than it's actually giving. And then obviously lay on the colour with this brush. If you want to see the tone, you can put it into your palette, but I just got paint and I just spread the dark where the dark areas are going to be, and then use the damp brush to spread out where the lighter areas are going to be. Then I cleaned the brush and I used the Payne's grey for the warmer, the sort of like shadows under the clouds. Good, let's move on. Now before I paint the distance, I want to paint the the foreground land. In other words, the area of land that we've got there. So it's quite simple. I'm going to use this brush again, and I shall use the damp brush for spreading any colour. Now we need an earthy colour, okay, to start with. So what I'm going to select from the areas, I'm going to select the brown. Then as I come forward, I'm going to use the burnt umber. So that one there is the brown, and that one is what is on my chart as a burnt umber. That one is not as quite as rich as that one, and because we're putting that one in, that will be the distant brown. Then I shall blend that through to a burnt umber more in the foreground, and we start along this edge of horizon line. So I'm going to pick up the brown, which is that one. I'll move to another part of the palette just to check and get enough colour and water to produce the tone you require. Too much paint and it goes very dark. See that, where it goes dark? Just add more water if it's too dark. And it needs to be quite, you can get an idea of the tone in the palette. So I've mixed quite, I just keep adding water and paint. I don't want too much paint at the moment. And I'm going to use a very damp wash of colour. Just keep reloading that brush. Just keep reloading. So that's the along the horizon line, and spread with your damp brush so that it softens. See the way it's softened that edge here? Just going to add a little more water to that. Now with the same colour, move forward. Keep reloading and damp the brush again as you come forward. Now into that colour, it doesn't have to be into that colour, just simply pick up the burnt umber and see how much richer colour that is. See that? Pick up a bit of that burnt umber again. See how much richer that colour is. Now it's gone a little light, but I'm going to go darker again, and these varying tones will all help with the final finished piece. And as I come forward, I'm going to use less water and more paint. See that? So I know I'm working very fast, but that's the key if you want to create clean washes of colour. Now there's not enough water coming up, so I'm just damping in the paint there like that, in the water like that. Then as you come into the foreground, let's add a darker brown. There we are. I'm just using the brown again to get a real dark brown, and just dropping that in while it's still wet. This paper does work very, very well for this sort of arrangement. And you can leave a bit of texture in the foreground there, don't mind that at all. And that is the next stage. Brown, softening with the colour with the damp brush in the distance. See, I've got a softer edge rather than a hard edge. Not vital, but it does help. And then as I came forward, I introduced the burnt umber, which is that one. Now I'm going to paint in the distant land. Now, as you can see, we do have some hedging right there in the distance. I don't know whether you can see that, but right in the distance there's a little bit of hedging. So I'm going to introduce that, and that, clean the brush again. I'm going to use this number 3 GRABIE brush all the time. Now that, right, will be just above that horizon line, because the land goes down behind that, and I need a blue grey. Well, maybe I can't quite see within those colours a blue grey. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to mix a little of the just a distant blue, not too powerful. I like that one, Cobalt. And I'm going to move to that part of the palette purely because I'm running out of palette. I could clean them, but there we go. Yep, that's Cobalt. Need to count up the colours as you go along. And I'm going to use Cobalt to create distant hedging. Now that also needs to be soft. So what you do, you use a little bit of water with this damp brush and you drop in water above where you're going to paint, right? So I'm not dampening along the horizon line, I'm dampening above that. Okay, so and then below that you paint and see it creep up. Watch it creep up into the sky. Now I need to be a little darker in that point, so I'm adding a little more colour. Watch it creep up, and you get, keep it straight along the horizon line, and you get some lovely hard and soft edges where you've damped. And let's be a little harder again, and you've got some trees standing up as well. I'm just adding what I feel is required. Okay, and once you get to that point, you've got to remember you've got your trees here. With those, we're going to have a couple of trees standing there. So once you get to that point, all you need to do is just spread that away, because most of this will be taken, you won't see the distance, but soften it as you go away to the outside edge. Just going to add a little more colour to that area there, just to give it a tree-like shape, and allow that to dry. So it's soft, lovely, distant colour. Now, how do we paint trees? Well, this is always a bugbear of some people, and until you've painted a lot of trees, I must admit they are more difficult than a building. But I've got two there, so that one stands behind that one, so that one has to be a weaker colour than that one, because that one will dominate that one. So once they overlap, the one behind actually sits back. Now I'm going to use this flat for this. You could use all sorts of brushes for this. Now when you look at a tree, you see lots of leafing and loads of branches. You've got to simplify that. All we need to paint a tree is, in this instance, you could use all sorts of brushes, but I'm going to use this flat brush purely because it came with the box and the package, and I'm dampening that. Now I need a green, and this is going to be a summer tree, so I need that putting green colour. So that's that one there. And let's just put that in that part of the palette. See how nice summery green that is? Now, how do you paint a tree? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is to paint this with enough water to be able to paint a darker tree on top. So this one, I'm not going to make them too high. I don't want to interfere too much with our lovely sky, so they'll stand more in the foreground, and just this is going to be the heart of the tree there, right? So just pull down like that and create a clump. Okay, then from that clump work up with the side of the brush to create an open top, dragging that paint out and down. There we go. So I'm painting the complete tree in leaf. Now, going to add more paint, less water, to get some darker tones to that. And I'm putting these mainly on the right hand side because I'm going to have sun coming from the left. and particularly down in the lower area, like that. And I'm going to go really dark then, so quite a lot of paint to pick up some outside edges. Can you see where I'm using the side of the brush, just touching onto the paper, just to get that open top to that tree. Now your trees will all come up at a different sort of feel to this, but if you usually use that basic technique, just touching a little bit on the left with this darker tone, but you've got to have at least 2 tones in your paints, light, medium and dark, otherwise you're not going to get the feeling of shape. And this trunk sits about there. And to paint the trunk, may as well paint it while it's still wet. I'm going to use Van Dyke brown. That's a nice brown for trunk work. Not too much water with this, so I'm picking up with a damp brush just the paint, and I'm pulling that up into it. Yeah, it is quite a strong brown, that. Just lose a little bit of colour, and that trunk sits there like that. Okay, then you will see a little bit of that trunk. Let's put that there, and a little branch coming up there. So I'm just putting in the main trunk at the moment and allowing that to dry. And to make that sit on the ground, I'm using the damp brush again to sit that nicely into the landscape. See the way I've spread that? And all of a sudden it sits nicely into the landscape. Allow that to dry. Now I've cleaned the brushes again. Now while that is drying, it's pretty much dry that side, but to get the finer branches in, we will need to allow it to completely dry. While that's drying, I'm going to put in the darker tree this side. I said that that one's going to be the weaker one. So I'm looking for a dark green, and there's a dark green there. So this really is an example of what you can do with these colours without, well, there's no mixing really. Right, now this one is treated exactly the same, just a little bit more water into that. Don't be too dark too early. There we are. So this is the centre of the tree. Okay, then just take a little bit of moisture from the brush and use that to paint in the top half of the tree, leaving some little areas unpainted. And that paint, because I put it in the centre, it gives it a bulk. There we go. See the top of that tree coming? And then we spread out. And this is not going to be too uniform. It'll be quite a large tree, a little nearer to us. Now I'm picking up a little bit more colour. There we go. A little bit darker in the lower area, and I'm trying to give this a little more detail. Now it's going to overlap into that one with a branch, and we need to balance that with some branches there. See how I'm uneven on this outside, fairly dense in the centre, and that is the key to creating trees. Then I'm going darker, picking up plenty of paint for the right hand side again, because of the way the light is coming from the left. So I'm just picking up paint. It's still a damp brush, you know, it's not completely dry. And 1 or 2 little darker edges that side. And there's a branch that hangs out there, a little darker there, just to give a definition. There we go. And that is a more foreground tree that stands in front of the larger tree behind, the smaller tree behind. There we go. Now I'm just going to add the trunk, and I'm going to use the Van Dyke brown again. This time a little denser mix. Need a bit more water than that. Van Dyke brown. Straight in like that. Be careful with your trunks. Don't make them too wide for the size of tree. It's a common problem. Just use the damp brush just to see the way I've set the tree into the ground by dampening the underside. Now that one I'm going to allow to completely dry. Now this one has now dried. It's got a spot of water there. Just need to lift off. That dropped from the brush. Right, now the one on the right needs it does need that colour. We need a bit more water into that colour. Just put that there, just so as we're not too dark. There we are. Take a bit of moisture from the brush. There we go. Now this one I'm putting in the odd branch here and there, working. And of course you've got to remember that branches only show in places in a summer tree where there's a gaps perhaps, and there's a branch there, and use the branches that you already have to take off. And then there could be a little branch there. See the way I'm putting in the smaller branches. I think that's sufficient, to be fair. Good. Now I'm going to let that completely dry before I put in some smaller branches onto that tree. Now that is almost dry, so I'm going to take, in the meantime I've just lightly cleaned the palette just in case I need to check out a colour again. Going to use Van Dyke brown again, but this time fairly dark because I've got dark leafing. And we're not going to see too much of the branches, but I think there could be a branch that actually sits up there like that, and another little branch heads off there. There may be quite likely a little branch from that dark area, and just use the point of this brush, take off a bit of paint. There you go, and another little branch there. And we may see a bit of the trunk area there. It's always nice to see a part of the trunk at some point because it justifies exactly what you're doing, you know. And the smaller branches here and there just coming out the top. Some of them are blending a little within the colour that's not dry, which is not a bad thing. There we go. And let's just justify that a little because it needs to be a reasonable width, and that's a little straight, so let's bring another branch from that, another little branch there, another little branch there. We will have another branch there. There we go. Let's just justify that with a dead branch that's coming out of the outside there. There we go. Good. So that's that. Now that in itself is quite a nice little study really, purely of two trees in a field. But I just want to elaborate a little on that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to clean that brush and put that to one side. I'm now going to take a smaller brush. I'm going to take the number 2 brush out of the packet, and I'm going to create a little bit of detail in the background. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a brown, which is that one, which is a little bit less intense than that brown, and I'm going to create fencing. So all you do, I need a gateway. I'm going to put the fencing, I could put it here, but let's put it in the distance. Now remember the size of the fencing. I'm going to put a gateway there. So I'm putting in 2 posts for the gate opening. There we go. Remember the size of the tree, don't make them too large. Then I'm putting in some smaller fencing areas. running across like that, and they'll go just behind that tree like that. Then I'm joining them up, but notice how I'm being very loose with this, extremely loose. So I'm only just suggesting that, and this fence could very well go behind there, so just introduce that. There we go. So that's a gate opening, and shall we have the gate open? So let's create a bit of perspective on that gate. There we go, and it's a 5-bar gate. There we go. Lovely little gate put in. We'll put a bit of hedging there shortly, but that's quite simple really. Nothing too difficult with that. Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this brush, take off a lot of moisture, and I'm going to drag that to create a feeling of, a little bit more paint in that, of a track running away into the distance. See the way that pulls the eye in towards that distance area? Brilliant. Now I'm going to pick up this brush again, clean it. It's still got that very dark paint on. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put in a distant green. So it's got to not be too, it's got to be more indigo sort of green. Yep, there we go. Let's just see what that does. It's a little intense. Maybe could do, no, that's fine. A little bit of that. Fairly dark. And it's got to hold in. Now, the moisture on the brush is very, very little. Take off a lot of the moisture. I want to show you how to do what we call a, this is actually phthalo green, actually. It's not indigo, it's phthalo green. And let me show you how I do distant hedging with a dry brush. See, if you've got a dry brush, you drag down like that. And all of a sudden, you get an opening to the top. Then you add a little bit more water, a little bit more phthalo green, like that, and you put some little touches along there. Then you get your damp brush, make sure there's not too much water on this, and pull that into the ground. So all you've got to do, and soften the top, and all of a sudden you've got yourself a bit of hedging that comes in on the right hand side. Now I'm adding a little brown now to that, just to give an earthy feel along the bottom, like that. Just purely to simplify it. Now all we need is to put the shadows on, and I've gone back to the number 3 again, the GRABIE number 3, and that will give me enough paint to put in some shadows. Right, now the shadow colours, well actually I'm going to use indigo, which is that one. It's actually a blue, but that, I think, you've got to remember that watercolour, that's that one, sorry, watercolour actually gives you the opportunity to put in a blue on over the top of the brown, and that then doesn't look as blue. So you've got to imagine what it's got to look like once the other colour shows through underneath. So let me show you what I mean. Not too much. So down that trunk, and that would actually cast a shadow a little bit underneath, and that would gradually taper like that, and gradually get less and less. There we are. So that's the shadow under that tree. Keep that nice and narrow. Notice how narrow that is. Now with the same colour, just put a little under the fencing, because that would also have some shadow. A little bit there. Then a bit more water. We're going for the Prussian blue. Yep, it's the Prussian blue actually I'm using. It's nice blue that. Water in that, don't make it too dark, because this is for the other tree. And a similar process down the left, the tree trunk on the right hand side. It's quite dark under there, and then that spreads out. But this one, you would probably see a little more of the shadow. That is a little strong, but just take some moisture off the brush and spread that through. There we go. Got to remember, watercolour dries lighter than it is when it's wet. So there's a lovely, two lovely trees. And what I'm going to do with this colour as well, put in a little bit of shadow on some of this. Notice how I'm producing a little bit of top to that, a little bit of shadow onto the underside of that, just to give it a little bit of depth really, just to balance the whole thing. Good. And I'm just using a little bit of texture. These are like what I class as finishing touches to the track, where there's a little bit of shadow possibly on that track area. There could also be a little darker shadow in the foreground. So let's add a little more water to that. Let me just show you how to do a nice dark foreground, like a cloud shadow. So all you need to do for that, you put your paint on like that. So that's not too dark. All right. Then you soften it with the damp brush. Like that. And you just pull that through. But you must leave it. You mustn't play with this too much. Could very well be a tree out of picture, casting that shadow. I say about a cloud shadow, it could be a tree out of picture. And let's just put another weak shadow. I'll show you how to do this side. It's a bit light there. So let's just put in a stroke of shadow there. And just soften the top. Like that. It just gives that just a little bit of additional interest on that right hand side, but it's still quite a soft section. Okay, good. So there we have it, the finished little sketch of two trees in a field with a gateway in the distance, painted with the flat brush that comes with the set, the number 2 pointed GRABIE brush, just clean that off, and the number 3 pointed GRABIE brush, and of course the wet brush that allows you to soften areas. The final thing you need to do, and I recommend that even if you're an amateur, always sign your work. Now I'm going to sign it in a dark brown in this bottom right hand corner. So I'm using the number 2, I'm using the Van Dyke brown, signing in the paint. I always do that. Don't want to be too dark, I don't want it to really dominate too much. So I'm going to sign my name, not too much water either on the brush. And my normal signature down in this bottom right hand corner is Colinsteedart. And that's the way I normally sign my work. So there you have it. That, if you've completed that and you've painted along with me, you can stop and start the video, obviously. So you can watch the sky being painted, you can stop the video, then paint the sky. You can watch the distance being painted, stop the video and watch paint the distance. If you have painted along, I hope you've enjoyed that demonstration. Well, I hope you've enjoyed watching that demonstration. It was using the GRABIE watercolour set. So it's an ideal beginner's set, I would say. The colours seem to spread particularly well, and it does take time to learn to paint in this way, but I suggest that if you are a beginner and you're learning, this is a good set to start with.